This is lesson 11.6, which is called Fractions, Decimals, and Percentages. Your objective in this lesson is that when given a story problem or some type of real-life situation, you should be able to find the fraction, the decimal, and the percent. You should know that people use percentages all the time. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to figure out your own test scores in class based on your knowledge of percentages. This is really helpful because a lot of times students want to know what percent they got on a test. And once you have a really solid background of knowing how to find percentages, you will be able to know your score based on how many questions that you got correct on that test. You'll also be able to understand better sports statistics, weather, such as percentage of chance of rain, and a lot more, just because of this lesson. Now here's a type of situation, and this situation is that 6 of 10 candies were green. And when I give you this information, I will want you to be able to find the fraction, the decimal, and the percentage of the candies that were considered green. So in order to find the fractions, this is a bit of a review, but all you need to have is 6 as your numerator out of a total of 10 candies. So fraction-wise, I know that 6/10 of my candies were green. Now in 5th grade, you will always want to simplify that. So your answer would be 3/5 of the candies were green. Now changing this to a decimal, if I know that 6/10 of my candies were green, then just saying it in a decimal format, that would just be considered 0.6, which is 6/10. Now, how I would go about changing that decimal to a percentage is I would go ahead and look at my decimal and move it to the right by 2 places. 1, 2. And that's where my new decimal would go in my percentage. So 0.6 equals 60% because that new decimal is right there at the end. Now, you don't need to actually write in that decimal. You actually always will leave it out, so 0.6 equals 60%. So there were 60% of the candies were green. This situation says 7 of the 11 students prefer math over PE. So as a fraction, that would just be considered 7 out of your denominator, which is your total number of students, which is 11. So our fraction is 7/11. Now changing that to a decimal, we kind of covered this on our last lesson, how I would go about changing a fraction to a decimal. 11 cannot have 100 as its denominator, so we're going to be doing some division, which is 7 divided by 11. Now, 11 does not go into 7, but it does go into 70 6 times. 6 times 11 is 66. Subtract. Add a 0. 11 goes into 40 3 times. 11 times 3 is 33. Add a 0. Bring it down. 11 goes into 70 6 times. Subtract. You'll get a 4. And as you can see, we actually do have a repeating pattern here. Now, my decimal will go straight up in my answer. So my decimal answer is going to be 0.636, or 636 thousandths. Now to go about changing that decimal to a percentage, I'm going to take the decimal where it's found in my decimal, and I'm going to move it to the right 2 places, so that my new decimal is going to be between the second 3 and the 6. So my percentage is going to be 63.6%. Now here's where you'll learn how you can find out your own percentages on tests. Let's say your name is Sarah, if you were a girl, and Sarah scored 8 out of 12 problems correct on her test. So what percentage would she have received on her overall test? Well, If Sarah scored 8 out of 12 problems correct, that means that she scored 8/12 of her test correctly. Now, my next step would be to go about changing that to a decimal. So I would say 8 divided by 12. And 12 can't go into 8, but it can go into 80. And 12 goes into 80 6 times. 12 times 6 is 72. Go ahead and subtract. Add a 0, bring it down. 12 goes into 80 6 times, which is 72. Subtract, you'll get an 8. And as you can see, my answer is going to be 66666. So my decimal is going to go up. So right now I'm looking at this number 0.66. And I'm going to take that 0.66 and change it to a percentage. So to do that, if I have 0.66 and I'm changing that to a percentage, I'm going to be moving my decimal to the right 2 places. So percentage-wise, Sarah scored a 66.6%. And we'll just keep that at 66% for now. Practice problem number 1. Feel free to pause. I want you to make sure that you are doing the fraction, decimal, and percentage for these problems. Okay, I'm going to solve this problem fairly quickly. The fraction for 5 out of 6 students who were girls would be 5/6. 5/6 of the students were girls. To put that in a decimal format, I'm going to take 5 and divide it by 6. 6 goes into 50 8 times. 6 times 8 is 48. Ooh, that's an 8. Add a 0, bring it down. 6 goes into 23 times. 3 times 8 is 18. Add a 0. So I know that I'm going to be getting another 3 again. And it will probably continue on for a while. So my decimal answer, after I bring my decimal straight up, is going to be 833 thousandths. To change that to a percentage, I move my decimal 2 places to the right, so my percentage is going to be 83.3%. Now, you would also be correct if you just put 83%. Practice problem number 2. Pause. Okay, well, if Jason scored 13 out of 15 problems correct on a test, then that fraction would be 13 over 15. So your fraction is going to be 13/15. To change that to a decimal, I would want to go ahead and take 13 and divide it by 15. And this is where you might have to do some longer division. 13 or 15 doesn't go into 13, so I need to add a decimal, add a 0. And then I need to try to decide how many times does 15 go into 130. Well, the easiest way for me to do this is I think 15 times 10 is 150. So I'm going to take 15 and multiply it by a number that's not quite as big as 10. I'm going to guess 8. 8 times 5 is 40. 8 times 1 is 8 plus 4 is 12. So 120 would be my answer. And that would be a really good guess. So I can add my 8 above the 0. I'm going to have 10 left over. So I'm going to add a 0 and bring it down. Next, I'm going to guess, okay, about how many times does 15 go into 100? Well, I like to take my previous work and say if 15 times 8 is 120, I'm going to go ahead and take 15. And this time I'm going to multiply it by 6, a number that's a little bit smaller. 6 times 5 is 30. 6 times 1 is 6 plus 3 is 90. And I'm going to bring that down below and subtract. And 6 was a really good estimate, so I can bring that out to the side. So for my decimal, if I were to keep on going, I'd keep on having 6s, but my decimal is just going to be 0.001. 0.86. Feel free to just go out for the hundreds on this kind of a lesson and also on your assignment tomorrow. Because usually when we work at percentages, we tend to round them, either round them up or down. Now in this case, I could keep on working and adding a 6. So if my decimal happened to be 0.866, then my percentage would be 86.6%. Now that is your true percentage. Now usually on a test, when I'm working on your tests, I go ahead and round to the nearest whole number. So I would make your percentage 87% without using a decimal. However, your real percentage would be 86.6%. Feel free to circle a smiley and feel free to also write a question if you have one.